Man, I might be late to the party, but I still showed up with chips and dip. All right, man, oh man. All right, first things first. Welcome to CNN. I'm the underdog, your host, Kirk Kennedy. Let's go in. On this channel, we take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. Okay. No, listen, we're all just trying to fake it till we make it in this world. All right, so if you are following what's happening in YouTube, over the last few weeks, comedian KevOn Stage has, I don't know what viral is anymore, but it's in my feed, and people have done multiple podcasts about it. So I don't know what classifies as viral anymore, but let's just say this went viral. And a lot of people have said a lot of things. And I usually, when these situations happen, I usually wait before I comment for two reasons. One, because I think we live in an accusation entertainment culture society, right? And podcasts, YouTube channels, and these are one of the main culprits of accusation entertainment, where you just build your channel around accusing people for not being authentic or being genuine. They're heretics, even if sometimes it's because you disagree with stuff that they say or their practice. I don't like to do that. But there comes a time where I get like Popeye, the old Popeye commercials. That's all I can stand, and I can't stand no more. And I got to eat my spinach. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the spinach. All right, so we're going to watch. If you've seen this, you've seen it. But there's a brother whose channel I follow. I like his stuff. I didn't feel like looking for the original piece. So I'm just going to use watching what Kev said. And then I'm just going to give you 4 things that we need to consider when people who are Christians who have a platform make statements that seemingly contradict what we think the Bible says. All right. So let's just start with this reality. All right. We're going to look at this video clip, and Kev is going to explain his position on LG, the sexual alphabet community. All right. And I'm just going to ask you, are you seeing what I'm seeing? Are you seeing this? All right, here we go. Let's watch this.
That just doesn't go over well with a lot of church people. And it's just, I've been thinking about this a lot. And if I go to Judgment Day and God is like, Kev, let's talk about your love for LGBT people and all the things you said, I'm going to take my chances with whatever happens. If he ends up being like, and I didn't like that, well, man, I thought I was going to go with love. Yeah. You know, the word Christian, the IAN in Latin means to be like. So a Christian is to be like Christ. To me, my understanding of the Bible, false teacher,
prefacing it.
A false teacher, just a nigga. That's all I am. Jesus.
So let me say one thing real quick. This whole false teacher, it's like to almost mock the people who disagree with you by taking on a moniker. First of all, you can still be wrong and not be a false teacher, fam. So that's not even a reality right here. But again, he drew attention to it to make Cam Newton laugh and all that. I get it. But and maybe people are saying he's a false teacher. I don't think he's a teacher. So I wouldn't call you might be a false comedian. You know what I'm saying? But teacher, it's different. But I digress. Let's keep going.
Led with love at every point.
At all points.
At all points. Even when the law, the adulterous woman, and listen, I'm not a theologian, so y'all can dissect this and say I don't understand. That's totally fine. The adulterous woman, the religious scholars try to catch him up. They say this woman committed adultery. The law says we're supposed to stone her. What do you say? And the legal thing, the right thing would be to stone her. But Jesus, in my understanding, came to do what was good, not necessarily what was right or legal. So he said, okay, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. So to me, you could have legally stoned her, but he chose the goodness of letting her go walk away unscathed. he was always with the sinners and the publicans and the tax collectors. These are the outcasts of society. These are people he spent time with. I think a lot of times, you know, we want to be, we being Christians, we want to be the chastisers and then the correctors of people. I don't choose that path. I choose love over and over, partly because the main reason was very personal to me. I was raised, you know, queerness is a sin, being gay is a sin. I was raised that way. And I remember when
Let me just say one thing. This isn't one of my main points, but I think it'd be to bring it up now. And maybe this is part of my main point that I should add to, but this contrast between love and approval is crazy. Crazy. Like you can, so to love someone, you have to approve of whatever they do if you think it's wrong, right? Like to be, that's a crazy look, but we'll come back to that. We'll come back to that. Keep that in your mind.
my son was born, I held him. You know, when I grew up, people was like, my son was gay. I kicked him out. Like that was commonplace. Yeah. Remember when I was holding my son, he was premature. He was like 4 pounds. So he was about this big. He didn't even touch my elbow. His head was here. His legs kind of finished right here. And I remember holding him like, man, I'm so sorry. It don't matter who he loves. I'm not going to kick him out. He don't have nothing but us. Like at that, man, I didn't say nothing to church, to nobody in church about this. I just remember having this thought internally.
Wow. You said a lot.
All right. Let's talk. Let's talk. Are you seeing what I'm seeing? I'm not going to belabor the point. Here's 4 things that we must consider. 4 things in particular when we're talking about the sexual acronym community and how the church should relate to them, how we should see this issue and so forth. All right. 4 things that we need to consider. All right. Here's the first. And I'm sure some people are going to be offended at me for saying this one. But here's the first thing we need to think about. I think the church isn't getting a fair read here. He said in his thing, you know, church people like to just chastise folks and be like, who's right? And to be fair, there are believers, professing Christians. I don't know if they're genuinely disciples of Jesus. I just bit my tongue. I tried to play it off. Genuine disciples of Jesus, I don't know. Only the Lord knows. But there are professing Christians who do like have belittle and attack, mock, and all of those people who struggle with same-sex attraction and so forth, and all the things that come with that, right? I agree. But let's be clear here. Those people exist. There are people who I think are not going to make it into the kingdom because they just are accusers of the brethren in the spirit of that. They don't love, 1 John 4:20 says, look, the man who says, I love God is a liar. You cannot love God whom you haven't seen if you don't love your brother whom you have seen, right? So that's just clear. That's a reality. But I think there's a large group of us in the church that disagree with the lifestyle, and we have biblical grounds for that. And we're not mocking or all this stuff, right? But here's the problem. Now, I could be wrong. I'm not a theologian, false historian, maybe. But I only remember John Calvin dealing with something close. There was a point where John Calvin stood in front of the communion table and was ready to give his life because there were people that were not believers that came into his church trying to take communion, and they drew swords, and he stood in front of the communion table, seemingly willing to risk his life to guard the table so that people that don't follow Jesus don't take communion. I don't know if that's a true story, but I heard it. Wasn't there. But here's the reality. The church does not have a history of the culture saying that things that we clearly believe are sinful are not sinful, and we're misreading our Bibles. You can't name any. Slavery may be the only area that you could legitimately say the church got that wrong and some treatment of women. But obviously, there are scriptures that say slaves obey your masters, right? They got the context of slavery wrong, right? I'll give them 100%. But there's no history of like drug dealers coming in the church like, yo, fam, hustling ain't sinful, man. That's not what it means. Take that out of your Bible. Who? There's no adultery movement saying, hey, You have to understand the context of what Paul meant. And the Greek word for adultery doesn't mean, there's no one saying that. No one's saying, hey, we should be able to harm children. Well, there are actually people saying that, so that's different. But this is the first time where the church is being confronted, not in a loving way, like, would you consider this? But like, your Bible are clobber passages that are clobbering us from our who we love. This is the first time that I'm aware of where a clear issue that we've always believed to be sinful, we're not talking about eschatology or different positions on, we're talking about biblical morality from the Old Testament to the New. There's no other sin issue that the church is being like, hey, maybe we're wrong. We're writing books on bestiality. Maybe we were wrong about that. I mean, Jesus didn't say anything about that, so maybe this is the first time the church has just been sucker punched. So yes, there are people who have sinned self-righteously, but then there are people who just genuinely feel like, I got to push back against this. This isn't biblical, and I don't want my kids to grow up thinking that something that we think will send you to hell is okay. Now you could say, well, you don't go after these other things. Okay, fine, maybe. But I would say the church isn't always getting a fair read. This is an unprecedented pursuit to get the church to change its mind on an issue that the Bible says, when you do this sin, you are sinning against your own body. Sexual sin is sin against your own body. Think about this for a second. All the drug usage, mutilation that people do, cutting them. There's so many things that people do to their bodies. And yet the Bible says, this is the only time you sin against your own body. So yeah, there are people who are tripping, believers, but some of us are just like, wow, this came out of nowhere, and it's hard to figure out what to do with it. All right, here's the second thing. And I figure some people will get offended at that, and I'm okay with that. I get it. You might unsubscribe. I totally understand. It used to be a free country, but we can still pretend like it is. All right, here's the second thing. We are not a monolith. Christians are not monolithic. If you're a genuine believer, then all of us should believe in Jesus Christ. Okay, in that sense, maybe. But we're not monolithic. Like, we don't all have to, we're not monolithic, you know? KevOn stage, he doesn't speak for Christianity any more than one Presbyterian speaks for all Baptists. Every one of us are going to stand before the judgment seat of Christ for what we said. We're not monolithic. So when I hear KevOn stage say stuff like that, I didn't rush to push back and hold up, because KevOn stage doesn't speak for me, and he doesn't speak for all Christians. If he wants to be like, hey, I choose love, and that's the way he chooses it. He said in the clip that you and I saw, if I stand before God and he says that, then you will stand before God. That there's no if. You will, we all will. That's 2 Corinthians 5:10, right? We must all appear before the judgment seat, each given to his body. So we're not monolithic. We don't have to all agree. If he thinks that that's okay, or this is what love looks like, that doesn't mean that it represents all Christianity. And this is part of the challenge that I see in the modern American church, at least, is we think that anyone that's a Christian with a platform somehow has jurisdiction over a larger body of believers, and you just don't. You don't have to agree with KevOn stage. You don't have to agree with Kirk Kennedy. You don't have to agree with Ruslan. You don't have to agree with Philip Anthony Mitchell. That's your decision. Now, there may be things that you should agree with because they're biblical, but you don't. So I think, like, we're not monolithic. KevOn stage, that's his perspective. Now, if I have someone say, hey, KevOn stage says this, you're a Christian, what do you think? That's a different ballgame. But for most of us, we're not monolithic. There are things that people have said I respect. I remember, I've debated people that I respected, but I didn't agree with things that they said. So I just think we have to be careful there. All right. Third, I'm not a theologian is avoidance. It's not humility. Here's what I would have respected KevOn stage way more if he would have said this. I'm not a theologian, so I can't answer this question. I'm not going to answer it. That's a theologian's question. So you say, I'm not a theologian. You say, false teacher here, because you know you're going to say things that people agree with. And by saying I'm not a theologian, that's avoidance. It's not humility, because you don't have to be a theologian to answer a question about what do you think the Bible says. When did that happen? Since when did we be like, okay, only theologians answer questions on morality? In fact, no one agrees with that. No one would say, I don't hear anyone in the sexual acronym community saying, hey, I'm not a biologist, I'm not a scientist, so I can't speak to assigned at birth versus I'm not a psychologist, so I can't speak to the mental. No one's doing that. You have an opinion because you believe something. But faith is about living out what I believe to be true, and it's about proclaiming the truth. You don't have to be a theologian to do so. In fact, Peter commanded believers to always be ready to give an answer for the hope that lies within them. You don't have to have credentials. You have to have courage. You have to have courage. And what happens is we, so I'm not judging Kev on stage's motives, but let me just say this. Whenever we're watching people who have public platforms, these are platform epistemologians, and their primary source of income comes from people's giving. So I remember, this may have been maybe 2 years ago. I don't remember what the issue was. I remember Kev on stage was appealing to people because they were no longer supporting his channel financially. And he was talking about having to fire people and all this stuff. And it kind of caught him off guard that people were not following him anymore, because it was clear my source of income comes from the giving. Like, there are times you all have blessed me by giving me super chat finances, money, like just blessing me $10, $15, $2, $1. All that stuff is like, wow, I'm grateful every time, but I'm not primarily dependent on that, right? When that happens, that's like, wow, Lord, thank you. That's crazy that people would give up their hard-earned money just to support what I said, but I'm not dependent on that. So I don't need to phrase things in such a way that I'm afraid to lose that. So a couple of years ago, he was telling people like, what's going on? How come people are, I'm not saying this is his motive, but whenever we look at people whose primary income comes from how people support what they say publicly, we just have to be careful to think, I don't know if he's saying that because he's afraid that if I say this, this could affect people's giving. I know pastors who lead churches that are afraid to challenge sin in their churches because they're afraid people will leave and that'll mess up their budget. I've seen this. You cannot, if you come to Solid Rock, you know that's not a problem. I've said from the pulpit, don't go here if you can't grow here. Not because I'm rude or want people to leave, but everyone is obligated to go where they can grow. And we respect the fact, even if you have to leave and your giving leaves with you, we respect your holiness and we respect your standing before the Lord enough that if you can't grow in our church, then we're okay. Just don't lie and slander us if you leave, because then we're going to have to speak to that. But people come and go, we get it. But when you watch these people who get paid by you all, you're essentially the ones paying their salaries by, supporting them through Patreon, giving super chats and all this stuff. It's going to be hard for them sometimes to speak truth. And that gets to my fourth thing. Here's the fourth thing we need to be aware of. What is often called love, Christian love today, is really just fear of man. It's fear of man. It's just fear of man. Let me explain to you why I'm saying this. I don't know Kev's theology. I don't know him. I know people that know him, but I don't know him. He used the John chapter 8, the adulterous woman scene. Here's the problem with using that as your metric for being loving. Now, this could just be, I'm not a false teacher, I'm not a theologian. It could be that. But you don't have to be a theologian to really read the narrative and see. Okay, so Jesus is aware that they are trying to trap him by bringing this woman there. If we're going to be real biblical, so let me be a theologian for a second, since Kev is not. The Mosaic law does not say bring the woman and stone her. It says bring the man and the woman. So already we have a problem because the man wasn't brought, just the woman was brought there. So on one level, you could say, well, we don't even know if we believe that you did this. You could have just brought any old woman off the street, right? Now, obviously, she did do something because of her conversation with Jesus briefly after. But the Mosaic law, as a theologian, let me explain to you, you bring the man and the woman, and they're both supposed to be stoned. But they just bring the woman in, which makes it even more dramatic because had the man and the woman brought, so you shame her by bringing her in front of the whole temple. Jesus understands that they're not here trying to do justice. They're here to try to trap him, right? So when Jesus says, he who has no sin cast the first stone, he wasn't saying that's the normal way that people should respond to someone caught in sin. He was saying for those particular group of people, he said, all right, then cast the first. He knew what was up. So he turned the tables and got them, and they walked away because they realized I can't in good conscience sin. That's not the takeaway. You can't judge people because you're sinful. After the people leave, Jesus says, woman, where are your accusers? And she says, they're gone, my Lord. He says, neither do I condemn you. Then he says, go and sin no more. He does not say, go back to the adulterous situation. I love you. I'm not judging you. Go back to being sexually immoral. I love you. I'm not judging you. I'm not condemning you. That's not what he says. He says, go and sin no more. So this is more fear of man. What we're calling Christian love is just, I'm hiding behind love. I'm not saying this is Kev on stage, but I think this is Kev on stage. I could be wrong. It could be he's not a theologian. But I'm saying I think a lot of Christians hide when they're in a public setting, public square, where they're afraid of the possible loss of income or the dramatic on attacks, getting doxxed in your all that stuff. I get it, but this is what we signed up for. 2 Timothy 3:12. Indeed, all who desire to live a godly life will be persecuted. This is why it's hard to live godly. I've seen people compromise in small ways, in different ways, because when you need people to pay you for things, you'll compromise just enough to continue to reap the benefits. It's fear of man. It's not biblical love, because you wouldn't do that. If that's the case, you should never discipline your children because they're doing something bad, but you love them and love always approves, right? You should never stop a friend from making a terrible decision because, hey, you love them, love always approves. That's just not, it doesn't work in any other situation. It only works in this moment because it feels safe enough to not be attacked for what you believe. And this leads to a deeper issue because Kev brought Jesus in. The people that invoke Jesus as the model for being loving forget the things that Jesus said. This is the same Jesus that said, I didn't come to bring peace, but a sword. Listen, I don't think people understand who Jesus really is and things that Jesus says. I don't think so. Because there's a Jesus of the pictures, the really good-looking dude with the long brown hair, trimmed up beard that could just walk in and steal your girl, right? The jeans model, right? The Wrangler jeans model Jesus. But then there's biblical Jesus, right? The dude who said he didn't have any beauty in his appearance that people would admire him, right? This Jesus went hard, fam. Like, what Bible are people, when they think about love, you have to have worse than a Jefferson Bible to think that Jesus is, the people that Jesus approved the most, it was like really dramatic expressions of faith. It was the Roman centurion who says, please, my servant needs to be healed, but you don't even have to come to my house. Just say the word. Jesus said, man, I haven't seen this much faith in all of Israel. The Syrophoenician woman who came and said, well, the food is not for the dogs, but for the children. And she said, well, even the dogs wait for the scraps that come off the children's table. He said, I haven't seen this much faith. You had Luke 17, the 10 lepers, right? 9 Jewish, 1 Gentile. He says, go and show yourself to the priest. It was a journey. That's Luke 17, right? There was a journey from where Jesus was. Jesus was on his way south to Jerusalem. He passes, what's the region? Well, it's a Gentile region, and there's these there's these people with leprosy, the skin disease, multiple skin disease. Skin is just peeling. It's just terrible looking, right? So Jesus says, go show yourself to the priest. Well, at some point on the way, they were healed. One of them turns around from the journey and comes back to find Jesus to thank him. And Jesus says, where are the other 9? Only this foreigner comes to thank us? So you got 3 Gentiles who demonstrate faith that Jesus approves of. The rest of the time, I don't think. What is hello, my name is Ania Montoya. Prepare to die. That does not mean what I think it means, what you think it means, right? So let me give you some of Jesus's greatest hits, fam. Let's look at some of Jesus's greatest hits. If you do this, use any AI that you want. Go to Logos AI, use any AI you want, and just type in, catalog all the things that Jesus said. What did he affirm? What morality did he teach? And how much correction and firm, hard sayings did he give? You will find out that a lot of what Jesus said would be harsh in the culture we live in today. So let's look at some of Jesus's greatest hits, right? He says this, not everyone who says it, this is Matthew 7, everyone knows this, right? Repeat after me. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord. Not everyone who says to me, you guys are too slow, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day, many, not a few people, not a few misguided folks, many will say to me, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do mighty works in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. Do you think for a moment that Jesus doesn't know that that is going to rock people's faith? And they're going to know, well, how do I know I'm saved then? You think Jesus, God, doesn't know that that statement is going to make Christians from here to the time he returns be afraid and uncertain? He didn't dumb it down. Jesus is saying many of you who profess to believe believers are going to be told, I don't know to you. In other words, you're going to hell. Many people who profess to be Christians, Jesus said is going to hell. You think that Jesus is so loving that he's going to approve of a sexuality that's outside of the will of God? I mean, I guess. I don't know. Here's number 2. He says this, follow me and leave the dead to bury the dead. Look, Jesus is teaching, right? And the man says, Jesus, I want to follow you, but my father just died. Let me go bury him real quick. Jesus, let the dead bury the dead. Let the dead bury the dead. He just told a dude in 14 words, you don't bury your father. Let the dead bury the dead. Follow me right now. In that culture, it would have been extremely rude to not bury your father. That's your dad, fam. Go handle your dad's business. Jesus said, forget that. Follow me right now. Don't even bury your dad. That's not hyperbole. Jesus is a gangster for real. This Jesus is like, hey, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Listen to this in John chapter 6, right? So let me give you context of this. This is one of my favorite Jesus punching people in the mouth statements. This is one of my favorite. So this is Jesus just fed people, 5,000 people. Supposedly, it's more like 9 to 12,000 because they were women and children. 5,000 men with 5 loaves and 2 fish. They just ate. Everyone ate, and there were 12 baskets full of food, 12 baskets, 12 tribes of Israel. Jesus saying, I can supply for all my people. I'm a theologian, right? So here we go. So they go looking for Jesus, and they ask him, where you been? He was like, I'm busy. You know what I'm saying? And they were like, well, show us a sign. And he was like, man. And so he says this, truly, truly, I say to you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Whoever feeds on my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up on the last day. For my flesh is true food, and my blood is true drink. Whoever feeds on my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me, and I in him. Fam, do you understand what's happening here? Jesus is talking to people, Jewish people, who know the Old Testament law, the Levitical code. God said, do not drink blood because life is in the blood. You're not allowed to eat the flesh. That's sinful. That's an abomination to God. And Jesus is using literal language that he knows will trip them up. They got so offended, and he kept raising the stakes. It said in John 6, go look at this yourself. Don't look right now because I'm still doing the live stream, and that would be extremely rude. But Jesus said this. It says this about them. Many of the disciples walked away. Not many people in the crowd, many of the disciples, people who had already believed in Jesus and said, he's the Messiah. I'm following him. So then it says, Jesus turns to the 12 and said, are you going to leave also? Genuine question. He was like, they might be offended. Jesus didn't worry about offending people. So to invoke Jesus as someone who is essentially saying, I can't judge people whose sexuality, you're right. You're not a theologian. You could be a false teacher. I don't know, but you clearly do not know what Jesus and the Bible had. I'm giving you some of the greatest hits. This Jesus said a lot of crazy. Listen to this. Listen to this. I might stop after this one because this is listen to this joy right here. This is Matthew 16. All right, let me give you a quick backdrop of what's going on here. All right, let me explain to you what's happening here. So Jesus is walking with the disciples, and he asks people, he says, who do the people say that I am? And the disciples say, some say Elijah, some say John the Baptist, and so forth, right? And then it says, Jesus says, who do you say that I am? Peter says, well, you are the Christ, the Son of the Most High, or whatever, right? Here's what Jesus says to Peter. He said, flesh and blood did not reveal that to you, but my Father in heaven did. So he told Peter. Now think about this for a second. This is a different video, what I'm about to say. But think about this for a second. Something that should have been so obvious, like, yeah, you're the Messiah, of course. Peter just agreed, yeah, you're the Messiah. God said, you didn't come up with that of your own logic. The Father revealed that to you. And then, from that moment on, once they understand they're saying Jesus is the Christ, that's when Jesus begins to tell them he's going to be given over to the chief priests and the elders, and he's going to be killed and rise on the third day, right? Matthew 16, this is all Matthew 16. So Jesus says that. Peter rebukes Jesus, right? Here's what Jesus says to Peter in verse 23 of Matthew 16. Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man. Theologian here, not a false teacher here. Let's talk for a second. This is Peter. This is the dude that Jesus just said to him, the Father in heaven revealed to you that I'm the Christ. That God supernaturally gave you wisdom, Peter, to know that I am the Christ. Peter loves Jesus. He's well-intentioned. Peter wasn't, we have no exegetical reason to believe that Satan jumped into Peter like he did Judas. It said Satan entered Judas in the Last Supper meal. It does not say Satan entered Peter. But Jesus says to him, get behind me, Satan. So what's happening here? This is what's really important. Theologian here. Jesus is declaring the holiness of God in this moment. Let me explain to you why. Because God is so holy that even a well-intentioned statement that is a slightly wrong about the will of God to God is satanic. Jesus knows Peter loves him. Jesus knows that Peter's going to be the head of the Jerusalem church. He called him Peter for a reason. It means rock. Upon this rock, I will build my church. He knows that Peter loves him. He knows that Peter doesn't understand that he's going to be crucified and rise on the third day. And he called him Satan just for being wrong, even though he meant well. That Jesus, the Jesus that called Peter Satan, that Jesus is okay with sexuality outside of God's will because he's loving? Are any of these statements from Jesus unloving? Last one. This is probably my all-time favorite. All right. John chapter 8 is an incredible dramatic chapter. Jesus is going back and forth with the Pharisees, right? And at one point, Jesus just says this crazy rebuke. He says this, you are of your father, the devil, and your will is to do your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks of his own character, for he's the father of lies. He didn't say you're acting like the devil. No, that wasn't enough. You got some devilish characteristics. He said your father is the devil. Now let me say something. Theologian here. In the days of Jesus, when in his earthly ministry, a man was identified by his dad. That's why all these genealogies are like Matthias, son of Zerubbabel, and Zerubbabel, son of. It's connected. In fact, some people, their names were defined like that. Jesus Bar. Bar meant son of, right? So it would be Jesus Bar Joseph. That's how they know who's who. Jesus Bar Jonah. Okay, that's not Jesus. Your dad was everything in the culture because you imitated your dad and followed your dad, not your mom. Remember when John the Baptist was born and he said, we're going to call him John? The people were surprised because his dad's name is Zechariah. Why would you call him a name not yours? Because he's supposed to say your father is the devil was like a straight, like, little bro move, right? Jesus was crushing them. Then you got stuff like Jesus telling his disciples, are you so dull? Do you not understand this? Would you prefer the Son of Man go back to heaven where he was? Oh, you faithless generation, how long must I tolerate you? That Jesus is the one that Kev and other people are saying was loving and wouldn't condemn, wouldn't. Again, I'm going back to what is often being called love is just fear of man. Because that Jesus in the Bible was crushing folks. People wouldn't go to his church today. They would not. Because you would leave every Sunday believing I'm not saved. You leave every Sunday, I'm not saved. You wouldn't go to his church. So where does that leave us? I don't know Kev on stage. I think he means well. And I'm not judging him, or I don't need to. I got my own flaws. But I think we live in a society where Christian content creators are given, or people who entertain us, not even Christian content creators. If you're actor, actress, athlete, whatever, people who entertain us are given almost an adoration because they entertain us that's given more than to God himself. I went to go see the Michael Jackson movie over the weekend. And it was a good time. It was me, my sons, Ruslan, and Chris, his cameraman. He was in town. He was in the DC area. And so we hung out, and then went to his show Saturday night. Friday night, we go see the Michael Jackson joint. And as we're watching it, I like the movie. I mean, if you grew up on Michael Jackson like I did, you're not going to worry about what everybody said about him. You're going to be in that joint, a chicken wow, a chicken blue. You're going to be right there with it, right? But there were scenes where he would be, doing concerts, right? And they would flash to him doing his moves, and they would flash to the crowd. And there were people just screaming, Michael, men and women screaming, crying, all this stuff, right? Fainting. And I just said this to the Lord. I was watching. I was like, wow, Lord, the idolatry is ridiculous in this joint. And I was a kid in the 80s watching that stuff happen. So I didn't think about it then. I just knew it was crazy watching people faint just because he walked into the toy store and you saw him in person. The idolatry was just ridiculous. And in a much more insignificant way, we give people who we are entertained by, who have platforms that are larger than something we ever think we could have. We think that their words and they carry so much. And sometimes these people are Pied Pipers leading people astray. It doesn't matter. So I think, listen, persecution is coming to the American church if for no other reason, because things are being done in Jesus's name that aren't of the Lord, and the people aren't even clearly, they just are in positions of power. So I think God is using that to bring that persecution so that believers can press and live a godly life. Here's my perspective for you. My channel is not super huge, and I get it. And I stopped trying to really grow it because I just got real life going on. So I stopped growing it a large thing. I could easily be like, all right, Ruslan, what do I got to do? I got to talk to a couple of people. What do I got to do? But I just don't have, I love this at times, but it's just not as important to me as it used to be. But I think there's a sense where people who have public platforms or that are popular Christians are just people. They do not have more authority than you. It doesn't mean God is blessing them. You know, Jesus said this. He said, what would it profit a man to gain the whole world and only to lose his soul? That means there are going to be people who gain the whole world, proverbially speaking. Like if popularity and platform was a gift from the Lord, then Taylor Swift, Beyonce, Jay-Z, the most richest people in the world, the athletes that are making hundreds of millions, they would all be, God's just blessing them and he loves them, and that's the people we should listen to. It's not true. It's not true at all. So I think we just, let's go through these again real quick. Number one, the church is not getting a fair read. I think some people are overreacting to how the church is overreacting. You know, there's a sin issue that is attacking us and people saying you're unloving for believing this. And it's like, two, we're not a monolith. We're not monolithic. I don't care what this guy says or what that guy. If I agree, if I agree. If I don't, I don't. I don't care who's popular, who it is. I'll agree with Philip. I'll just agree with anybody if I think it's unbiblical, and everybody should me. It's just reality. We're not monolithic. We don't need to be like, oh my gosh, he said this, and we got to now defend it. I'm not defending nothing this man says. I'm making a video because there's a lot going on, and I want to put my 2 cents in. 3, if you're not a theologian, then don't answer the question. That's not humility. Like, just say, hey, if I'm not a theologian, you can't answer the question. But I think it's just, no, I think it's cowardice to do that, because then you still answer the question. So then how should we process it? Are you saying only theologians can answer that question accurately? So then how do we process your answer because you're not a theologian? You know, this isn't like the Holiday Inn commercials. Well, I'm not a theologian, but I do play one online. It's like, no, I'm not a pastor, but I do play one on Sundays. No, you either answer the question or you don't. And 4, a lot of this is just fear of man, what's being called love. Jesus was the most loving. Jesus was love personified and would not be loving in today's cultural standards, because he would challenge so much of the idolatry that we seem to feel entitled to. And many people would find out you're not far from the kingdom. You're not in it. You're not far from it. So hopefully that's helpful. And if it's not, I get it. If it is, like and subscribe to the channel. Let's go. Let's get that channel back up to, I'm trying to get to 5,000 subscribers by 2030 before Jesus comes back. I'm going to be judged if I don't have 5K subscribers. So come on, guys. Help me get to 5K. I'm about to call Rules on, like, bro, bring me back on the show. I need to bump up. What are we doing right now? Let's go. We went to the movies. Let's go. No, I'm just playing. But listen, put your comments in the comment section. Like and subscribe, all of that. Appreciate you. Many things to talk about. It's a wild time. I hope you're seeing this. Are you seeing what I'm seeing? I hope so. Especially now, I just showed it to you. All right? Grace and peace. See y'all in the next video. Peace.